The wind had teeth that day, dry, cracked, gnawing through cloth and skin. She arrived in the back of a wagon, no name, no words, no bags. Just a 12-year-old girl with hair like scorched straw and a stare that didn't blink. Her dress was torn, her knees were scraped raw, and her wrists bore the faded marks of rope. She was not rescued. She was purchased. The rancher stood in the shade of a broken windmill, holding a folded bundle of cash that smelled of sweat and desperation. The trader didn't stay long, took the money, muttered something about no refunds if she's broken, and drove off. The girl stepped off the wagon and into the dirt like she'd done it before, many times. Like this wasn't her first trade. She carried one thing, a small dented tin box, locked with wire. The ranch behind the man was barely standing. Sagging beams, a roof that let in more stars than it kept out. Fence posts leaning like tired bones. The fields were yellow, dead. The well had been dry since last spring. His cattle had begun chewing wood. He didn't ask her name. She didn't offer it. That night, he gave her the barn. She didn't cry. She didn't sleep. She sat cross-legged in the hay, the tin box on her lap. At midnight, she opened it. Inside was a folded piece of paper, stained with something darker than time, a lock of pale hair, and a tiny cloth doll, missing its eyes. She whispered something to it, and in the stillness beyond the barn, past the dry well, something in the ground stirred. The rancher, alone in his bed, felt a sudden cold, not from wind, from below. He would later swear he heard breathing in the floorboards. The sun rose flat and bitter, like it didn't mean it. The rancher found her already working, feeding chickens that hadn't laid in months, sweeping dust that only returned. She moved quietly, like a shadow trained to stay out of sight. He watched from the porch with black coffee in hand and a headache behind his eyes. He'd bought a dozen hands in his time, men mostly. All ran off or drank themselves dumb. But this girl, this child, worked like she owed the earth something. She never asked for food, never spoke, never smiled, and never let go of the tin box. Even when she worked, it hung from a rope around her neck, bumping softly against her chest like a heartbeat in metal. That evening, a crow landed on the fence post. Its eyes were milky white, its feathers wrong, too many, too sharp. It watched the girl with stillness that wasn't animal. Then it let out a sound, a broken croak, twisted like speech, and flew off. The cattle wouldn't go near the barn that night. They stood huddled at the far fence, wide-eyed, backs turned to the wind. Inside the barn, the girl lit a single match and held it above the open tin box. She whispered again. Not English, not anything the rancher could recognize. He didn't mean to watch. He told himself he was just checking the animals, but his boots carried him to the barn door anyway. He stopped when he saw her kneeling on the ground, her eyes closed, her hands trembling. The matchlight flickered. Then something moved in the hay behind her, slow, deliberate, like a hand rising from sleep. He backed away without a word. The girl never turned around, but she whispered louder. And under the floorboards, something listened. The rancher tried to forget what he saw, told himself it was a shadow, a trick of light. Dust in his eyes, long days, poor sleep. But that night, something changed. It began with the rats. They'd always lived in the barn, part of ranch life, but now they were leaving, fleeing. He saw them at twilight, pouring from under the slats like floodwater, dozens, then hundreds, eyes wide, backs arched, running from something they couldn't fight, something deeper than instinct. He didn't go near the barn. The girl stayed inside. He caught sight of her once through the high hay window, standing dead still, staring into the corner, not moving, for hours. The next morning, a calf was born. It had no eyes. The rancher buried it himself, hands shaking, sweat freezing to his back. When he looked up, the girl was watching him from a distance. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. That afternoon, he finally broke. walked out to the barn, boots heavy, shotgun in hand. The door creaked louder than usual. He found her sitting in the same place as always, cross-legged in the hay, tin box open. But now the doll inside had eyes, sewn on, 2 black buttons freshly stitched with red thread, and beside it was a tooth, not hers, not human. He shut the box with a snap, but she didn't react, just looked up at him, not afraid, not angry, just watching. Then she pointed downward, at the ground beneath them. He heard it again, not a sound exactly, but a presence, like something vast shifting its weight under the floor, like roots waking up, like a door opening. But there was no door, not yet. 3 days passed without a word. The ranchers spoke once, tried to ask what was happening, but the girl just looked through him, as if language had lost its meaning. Her hands worked, her feet moved, but her mind was elsewhere, buried maybe. That night the wind blew east, an old omen in these parts. East wind meant change, or judgment. Around midnight the tin box opened again, but this time she didn't whisper to it. She listened. The sound came from inside, but not from the objects. It came like heat comes off a fire, invisible, pulsing, ancient, and it carried a name. Not hers, but the rancher's, his real name, the one no one knew, the one he hadn't heard spoken since the war, since the fire, since the deal. He woke up gasping in bed, not from a nightmare, from memory. And from outside, in the darkness of the barn, he swore he heard it spoken again. Software clear, like a warning. By morning, the old cowhand, the only other man still working the ranch, was gone. No note, no footprints, just a bloodstain on his pillow and a long black hair wrapped around the doorknob. The girl didn't react. She just cleaned the kitchen. Later, the rancher found her in the cellar, staring at the stone floor. "Who are you?" he wanted to ask, but he couldn't, because deep inside he already knew not who she was, but what she was here for. The cellar hadn't been opened in years, not since the drought, not since he nailed the trapdoor shut with rusted spikes and whiskey breath, but now it stood open, the girl at its edge, looking down into the dark as though it had called her by name. The rancher stood at the top of the steps, heart pounding. He knew what was down there, or rather, who. 2 bodies buried shallow under packed dirt and old regrets. A man and a woman. Not his kin, not exactly, just necessary once. Part of a deal made during a bad winter and a worse decision. The man was a preacher. The woman had eyes too sharp for lies. They came with questions, and they didn't leave. He told himself they deserved it, told himself no one would find them. But now the girl stood over the place like she had always known, and when she turned to look at him, her eyes were filled not with judgment, but with knowledge. She walked back up the steps, didn't say a word, but that night, when the wind stopped again and the crows lined the rooftop in perfect silence, the rancher heard digging from beneath the cellar, not frantic, not desperate, just slow, patient. The next morning, the trapdoor was shut again, and beside it sat the tin box, open, inside, 2 buttons, one black, one white, and a scrap of paper that hadn't been there before. It had a name written on it, not his. Heron, but not the name he'd given her in his thoughts. It was older, and something not quite human. Night fell like a curtain of ash. The ranch lay silent save for the slow creak of the windmill and the soft scratching of dry leaves across the porch. The girl sat alone on the porch steps, the tin box open at her side. Her fingers traced the faded letters on the scrap of paper. The name felt like a key, cold, sharp, and heavy with meaning. From the darkness beyond the barn, shadows seemed to gather, stretching long and thin like fingers reaching toward her. The rancher watched from the window, his breath shallow. He felt the weight of unseen eyes on him, a presence that did not belong to this world. Suddenly, a low whisper stirred in the night air, soft, almost inaudible, yet unmistakably calling her. The girl's eyes fluttered closed. Her lips moved silently, reciting words older than the desert itself. Behind her, the ground shuddered faintly, as if something buried was waking. A faint glow pulsed beneath the soil, casting eerie patterns on the barn walls. The wind carried a voice that was neither human nor beast, speaking a name. The girl smiled faintly, her gaze now distant but resolute. She was no longer just a child bought in silence. She was the keeper of a secret that could unmake the world around them. The first light of dawn crept across the cracked earth, washing the ranch in cold amber. The girl rose from the porch, tin box clutched tight, her steps soundless on the dry ground. The rancher followed, shadows cast long and wavering behind him. She led him to the far edge of the property, where the ground was scorched and cracked, the earth seeming to breathe beneath his boots. There, buried half in dust, was a rusted iron key, heavy and ancient. Without a word, she pressed the key into his palm, her eyes searching his face for understanding he did not yet possess. In that moment, the wind shifted, carrying with it the scent of smoke and forgotten memories. The rancher felt the weight of his past settle upon him like a shroud, debts unpaid, sins buried deep beneath the soil. He looked at the girl, not a victim, but a reckoning. And somewhere beneath them, the earth whispered its warning. The afternoon sun bore down mercilessly, burning the horizon into a hazy line between earth and sky. The ranch lay silent, save for the faint whistle of wind through cracked wooden beams. The girl sat near the dry well. The tin box closed at last, but her eyes were fixed on the horizon, distant, searching. The rancher, restless and uneasy, cleared the rusted porch steps and tried to piece together the fragments of the past. The names whispered in shadow, the buried bodies, the creeping sense of dread. As the sun dipped low, the wind shifted again, bringing with it the faint scent of smoke and old leather, memories from a life long buried. Suddenly, the earth beneath the well trembled. A loose stone clattered to the ground. The girl rose, her expression unreadable, and walked toward the well. Without hesitation, she knelt and pressed her hands against the cool stone. A soft glow pulsed beneath her palms, faint and trembling, as if the earth itself was awakening. The rancher watched, heart pounding, as shadows stretched long and dark, reaching toward the fading light. In that moment, the past was no longer buried. It was coming back. Chapter 9. The Rift in the Dust. The wind died suddenly, leaving the world suffocating in a heavy silence. The ranch, once alive with the creak of wood and distant calls of cattle, now felt abandoned, like a ghost town caught between yesterday and oblivion. The girl stood at the edge of the cracked earth, her eyes reflecting a fire no one else could see. The tin box hung loosely around her neck, its weight a constant reminder of the secret it held. Beneath her feet, the soil began to shift, as if breathing in time with her own shallow breaths. Dust rose in faint spirals, twisting into shapes that dissolved before they could be recognized. The rancher approached cautiously, every instinct screaming to flee, but his feet remained rooted. The past clawed its way from the earth, dragging with it the long-buried sins he thought he'd escaped. A sudden crack split the ground nearby, a narrow fissure widening fast, swallowing dry twigs and broken stones. From its depths came a cold, guttural whisper. A name, repeated again and again, louder now, echoing through the stillness. The girl dropped to her knees, pressing a trembling hand to the earth. Her lips moved silently, reciting words that did not belong to this time or place. The rift pulsed with an unholy light, revealing shapes that should not have been unearthed. The rancher's heart hammered as the ground beneath them promised to open fully, to swallow them whole, or unleash what had waited too long. twilight bled into night, the sky a bruised canvas streaked with the last rays of sun. The ranch lay cloaked in shadows, the wooden structures looming like silent sentinels against the darkening horizon. The girl sat beside the flickering fire, her eyes reflecting the flames and something far older, a sorrow that stretched beyond time. The tin box rested heavy on her lap, its secrets sealed for now. The rancher stood nearby, restless, haunted by the day's revelations and the growing unease that settled deep in his bones. He watched as the wind whispered through the dry grass, carrying with it the faintest hint of voices, echoes from the past or warnings from what lay beneath. Suddenly, the fire snapped and sputtered as a cold gust swept through the clearing. The girl's gaze lifted, focused on the distant hills where shadows twisted and danced. A shape emerged, tall and thin, moving with a purpose only the night could grant. The rancher's hand instinctively went to the old revolver at his side, but the girl only smiled faintly. She whispered a name, soft but certain, and the figure paused. The night held its breath. In that moment, protector and cursed, child and reckoning stood on the edge of something irreversible. The night pressed heavy against the ranch, swallowing every sound but the distant howl of a lone coyote. The girl stood at the edge of the clearing, her breath visible in the cold air. The tin box hung from her neck like a silent talisman, its weight heavier than the night itself. From the shadows, a figure emerged, a stranger wrapped in dust and secrets, his eyes sharp and wary. The rancher stepped forward, heart pounding, fingers twitching near his holster. He knew this arrival was no accident. The girl watched silently, a strange calm settling over her face. The wind shifted, carrying a whisper of forgotten names and unfinished business. Between the three, a fragile tension hung, the kind that cracks the silence and shatters trust. The stranger's gaze locked on the girl. Recognition flickered in his eyes, quickly masked by caution. Words were scarce, but the silence screamed louder than any gunshot. The stranger pulled a crumpled photograph from his coat, faded, torn, but unmistakable. It showed the girl, years younger, eyes bright but haunted. Standing beside a man the rancher remembered all too well. The man who once ruled this land with iron and blood. The stranger's voice was rough, edged with regret. He spoke of debts and broken promises, of a legacy buried beneath dust and lies. The girl's fingers tightened around the tin box. Her eyes gleamed with a fierce determination, not just to survive, but to reclaim what was stolen. The rancher felt the weight of his own past press down harder, as if the ground beneath him was ready to swallow them all whole. The fire flickered between them, casting long shadows that seemed to dance with the ghosts of their history. The stranger's hand hovered near his belt, tension crackling like static. The rancher stepped forward, voice low and steady. He spoke of protection, of second chances, of the price paid too late. The girl looked from one to the other, the man who'd saved her, the stranger who threatened their fragile peace. In her silence, a decision was made, not with words, but with the steady set of her jaw and the light in her eyes. She would fight, not just for herself, but for the ghosts that still lingered in the dust. Suddenly, the night erupted. A gunshot shattered the quiet, echoing across the barren land. Horses whinnied, startled and wild, as a storm rolled over the hills, thunder roaring like the anger of the earth itself. The girl dropped to the ground, pulling the tin box close. The rancher drew his weapon, eyes scanning the darkness for the source. The stranger ducked behind the nearest tree, muttering a curse. In the chaos, a figure lunged, a face half hidden in shadow, eyes burning with fury and betrayal. The battle for the past and future of the ranch had begun, and none of them would walk away unchanged. The dawn was heavy with smoke and sorrow, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and dying embers. The aftermath of the night's chaos lay scattered across the barren land. Hoofprints pressed deep into the dust, spent shells glinting cold under the pale light. The girl sat alone beneath the skeletal remains of an old oak, the tin box unopened at her side. Her eyes stared past the horizon, searching for answers that refused to come. The rancher approached slowly, each step measured, haunted by the ghosts of the battle and the weight of choices made in shadow. He spoke no words. None were needed. Between them hung the silence of things left unsaid. Debts unpaid, promises broken, and a future uncertain. The wind carried a faint whisper, a name, a warning, a prayer. And somewhere deep beneath the earth, the past stirred, waiting for the reckoning yet to come. The afternoon sun blazed mercilessly over the ranch, casting stark shadows that seemed to deepen the scars left by the night before. The girl moved with a quiet urgency, her fingers never leaving the tin box that held their fragile hope. The rancher paced nearby, his face etched with exhaustion and resolve. Each moment stretched taut between them, fragile as the thin line between survival and surrender. Suddenly the earth trembled beneath their feet, a reminder that the past was not done with them yet. The air thickened with anticipation and fear, as if the very land held its breath. The girl's eyes flicked toward the distant hills, where shadows shifted like restless spirits. In that suspended moment, both knew the battle was far from over, and the price would be paid in blood and silence. The sun dipped low, bleeding orange and crimson across the endless desert sky. The ranch was bathed in a soft, fading light, fragile as a whispered goodbye. The girl stood at the edge of the corral, the tin box clasped tightly to her chest. Her silhouette was sharp against the dying day, a lone figure caught between past and future. The rancher approached, his shadow long and tired, footsteps slow but steady. Behind them, the wind carried the distant howl of a coyote, a mournful song that echoed the unspoken pain lingering in the air. They shared a look heavy with understanding and unvoiced promises. As night claimed the land, a fragile hope flickered like the last ember in a dying fire, waiting to be rekindled. The first light of morning crept softly over the horizon, casting a gentle glow on the dust-covered ranch. Silence lingered, broken only by the soft rustling of dry leaves stirred by a timid breeze. The girl stood at the fence, eyes fixed on the awakening land. The tin box, now weathered and worn, hung from her neck like a quiet promise. The rancher stood beside her, a quiet guardian of the fragile peace they had fought to protect. Behind them, the past lay buried, but its echoes whispered on the wind, a reminder of pain, loss, and the cost of redemption.